Dust hung over the track like smoke when the jeep rolled out of the outpost that morning. The ranger had driven this route so many times that his hands turned the wheel almost on their own. Check the northern fence. Note fresh tracks at the river crossing. Count how much water was left in the last pans. In the dry months, the work was less about finding animals and more about counting the ways the land was running out. He noticed the hyena only because everything else was ordinary. At first, she was just a pale shape on the road behind him, blurred by the heat that started to rise off the sand. He glanced into the rearview mirror, saw movement in the twin ruts of his own tires, and expected it to peel away into the bushes. After a few minutes, like most hyenas did, she did not. She trotted in the tracks, as if the jeep had drawn rails and she had decided to run along them, head low, shoulders rolling under a dusty, spotty coat. Her ears, round and bitten at the edges, pointed forward toward the sound of the engine. He slowed for a washout where rain had eaten the road months earlier. The jeep bounced, the tires slid, the suspension complained. The hyena used the same line he did, stepping neatly where the ground held, avoiding the holes as if she had driven this road with him before. At the first waterhole, he stopped, logged the depth and the muddy ring that showed how far it had fallen. When he turned, she stood at the edge of the open ground, not close, not far, tongue hanging, sides lifting and falling, eyes fixed on the vehicle. Then she turned away and vanished into the thorn. It might have ended there. One more odd moment in a place full of them. The next day, she was back. Different route, different time. He took the western loop before the tourists woke up, hoping to catch poacher tracks before they got too old. The air was cool enough that his breath still fogged a little in the early shadows of the hills. When he reached the stretch where the track bent alongside a dry riverbed, he noticed the prints first, broad oval pads with the stubby toe marks hyenas left when they were unhurried. They sat inside his own tire marks from the previous day, as if the animal had walked the same road not long after him. He kept driving. 10 minutes later, the mirror showed a familiar outline trotting up behind the dust. Same sloping back, same ragged patch on the flank where fur grew thinner, an old scar dragged over her ribs. Same steady swinging gait, not desperate, not afraid. The radio on the passenger seat crackled with routine calls from other patrols. He half listened. Fence intact here. Fresh snare removed there. A vehicle seen near the border, plates half hidden by dust. Reports that fit the usual pattern of people pushing against the edges of the reserve. Behind him, Paws kept time with his engine. Hyenas used roads. He knew that. They took the easiest route between a carcass and a den, between one set of smells and the next. But this felt different. She was not just cutting across, she was matching him. He tried to shake the feeling by doing something practical. On the third day, he changed his pattern. Instead of taking the straight track to the northern boundary, he turned off early at a faint, rocky side road that ran along the bottom of a low ridge. It was rough enough that he usually avoided it, unless he had a reason. The jeep crawled and jolted. Gravel pinged the undercarriage. Thorns scraped both doors. In the mirror, dust boiled and cleared. She was there again, using the same line, stepping over the same stones, never quite catching up, never dropping away. When he stopped to note a broken fence post where an elephant had tested the wire, she stood at a distance, eyes bright in the shade of a sickle bush. He told himself it was coincidence. The reserve was big, but the roads were few. Paths crossed, patterns overlapped. Still, by the end of the week, there was a thin thread of unease woven through his routine. He began to notice details about her that he would have missed if she had been just another night shape at a kill. She was thin for an adult, but not starving. Her coat had a dull, dry look, as if dust had sunk deeper than the surface. On her forelegs, the fur seemed more worn, the skin underneath tinted slightly darker by some stain that was not just soil. When she moved downwind of the jeep, a faint, unfamiliar taint edged the usual wild scent that clung to hyenas. Something sharp and chemical, gone if the breeze shifted. He made a note in his patrol book, a short line squeezed between entries about broken wire and a lion sighting. Spotted hyena following vehicle several days in a row, adult female, possible injury, odd smell. The pages above that line were full of other concerns: poachers, cattle pushing through gaps, charcoal burners hiding old fires. None of them involved a hyena choosing a jeep as company. The question of rabies came next, because it always had to. He watched her from behind the windscreen when she drew closer one afternoon near a windmill. No foam, no jerky, mindless movement. Her gait was smooth, her eyes clear, the arcs she traced around the vehicle careful, not reckless. She was not sick in that way. It would have been easy to ignore her. He had enough to handle with problems that came with names and paperwork. Hyenas did not file complaints at the office. They dealt with trouble in teeth and scars and silence. But she kept appearing, and the path she followed with him began to feel less random. On maps, the reserve looked like a patch of green. Outside its fences, the color changed quickly to fields and dirt roads and places where trucks moved in and out with loads of things that did not belong in any brochure. People were supposed to use official dumps for their waste. In practice, they liked edges of towns, of fences, of laws. The ranger had seen small, illegal pits creep closer to the boundary over the years, piles of plastic and metal and organic scraps that drew dogs, vultures, and sometimes hyenas out of the protected land like a magnet. He knew what those places looked like after dark. Broken bottles, rot, the gleam of hungry eyes, the quiet suffering when someone tossed poison into the heap to solve a problem quickly without thinking about what would come to eat it first. He had shut down a few of those dumps when he found them. Others had shifted, moved, hidden deeper in the folds of thorn and rock as people learned to dodge patrols. The hyena's route began to trace a crooked line toward one of the few areas he did not know well. It started with small deviations. On the 6th day of seeing her, he noticed that she trotted a little faster whenever he took the track that ran closest to the southeastern corner of the reserve. When he turned away from that direction, staying deeper inside, she let the distance between them grow. When he angled the jeep back toward that corner again, she closed the gap. The next morning, he decided to test it properly. He left the outpost at the same time as always, followed his usual path toward the first waterhole, logged the numbers, watched a pair of kudu melt into the brush as the sun came up. Then, at a junction where the main patrol road continued straight, he turned abruptly onto a lesser-used track that drifted toward the boundary like a question. Dust rose. The engine hummed. The radio remained quiet. In the mirror, the pale, solid body appeared again, trotting steadily in his wake. He drove until the boundary fence came into view, strained wire on weathered posts, running across the land in a line that meant more to people than to any animal. Beyond it, the land outside the reserve looked the same at a glance. Same thorn. Same scrub. Same soil baked hard. But his eyes knew the difference. More tracks from boots. More vehicle marks. More evidence of use without care. He pulled up under a fading acacia where the track turned along the fence. The hyena stopped too, maybe 40 meters back. She paced in a small, tight loop, then sat, sides heaving, watching dust drift down. He switched off the engine. The sudden quiet felt heavy. Heat already pressed on the metal chassis. A lark called somewhere high, out of sight. Wind moved through dry grass with a low, rough sound. For several long seconds, nothing else happened. Then, the hyena stood again and did something she had not done all week. She left the road. She stepped out of the wheel tracks, slid through a gap in the bush, crossed under the fence in a shallow scrape where the soil had been worn away, and appeared on the far side of the boundary. She moved a short distance and stopped, turning her head back toward the jeep. The posture tugged at something in his mind. A dog about to lead the way. An animal nervous of going on alone. It was simple body language, come or stay. He knew better than to read too much intention into wild creatures. He had seen dangerous mistakes grow out of that habit. Yet he stayed where he was, because the rules on his side of the fence were clear. The reserve ended there. His authority did not. She paced back and forth, tail twitching, looking from him to the distance and back again. Finally, with a flick of irritation that was almost human, she trotted away into the low thorn. He logged the coordinates, watched until she vanished, and told himself that would be the end of this odd thread. It was not. The next morning she was there again, waiting near the same junction before he reached it. Not directly on the road, but close enough that dust from his wheels reached her mottled coat. When the jeep came near, she fell into step behind it like a shadow. This time, when he reached the boundary and stopped under the acacia, he did not turn the engine off. He watched her cross under the fence again, same shallow scrape, same quick glance back. She moved a little further this time before she stopped. Maybe 50 meters, maybe 100. It was hard to judge in the shimmering heat. She waited. He should have called someone else. He should have reported that there was an animal behaving strangely and asked for another unit to check outside the park where his job officially ended. Instead, he did something small. He pulled the jeep a little closer to the fence and turned the engine off, leaving it in gear, handbrake on. The silence deepened. He stepped out. Heat hit his face like opened oven doors. The smell of dust and old, dry plants flooded in, along with something else, faint and wrong, carried from the other side. A sour, burned tang that did not belong here. He walked to the fence, boots crunching on old droppings and brittle leaves. The hyena watched him from her side with flat, steady eyes. She did not back away. She did not advance. Her ears flicked, her nose lifted, reading the air. The scrape under the fence was wide enough for her, but narrow for a man. The wire sagged slightly, a sign that something heavier than a jackal had forced its way through here more than once. He stood for a moment with his hands on the top strand, feeling the rough bite of rust under his palms, and argued with himself. Then he backed away, got into the jeep, picked up the radio, and called in his position. He did not mention the hyena in his short report. He simply said he had found a damaged section of boundary and was going to check for signs of livestock or vehicles just outside, then walked back to the fence with a set of pliers and the bitter taste of risk in his throat. He loosened the lowest wire until he could push it aside, slid through, and straightened up on the other side of the line that his paperwork said he should not cross. The smell hit harder now. It rode under the clean dryness of dust and thorn, rot, burnt plastic, something acidic that caught in the nose and sat in the back of the throat. It was the smell of things thrown away without thought, piling up in heat. The hyena turned and began to walk. She did not wait for him. She did not check his distance. She chose a direction and took it at that same swinging trot, heading along a faint path in the bushes where other paws and hooves and tires had passed. He followed, careful to keep enough space between them that she would not feel him as pressure. Bush scratched his uniform. Seeds stuck to his socks. Sweat ran down his spine in thin, irritating threads. The land dipped. The thorns opened into a shallow basin he had never seen from the road. It lay just far enough below the level of the track and the fence that someone in a vehicle could drive past all day and never notice. From above, it might look like just another dry hollow. On the ground, it was something else. Metal drums lay on their sides, some split open, thick, dark residue clinging inside. Torn plastic bags had collapsed into themselves, fused by sun. Piles of broken glass and twisted scrap metal glittered through a skin of ash. Blackened patches showed where someone had tried to burn what could not be buried. Nothing was neat. Everything looked like it had been dumped in a hurry, over and over many months. He did not need training to see that this was not household waste. The drums carried no labels now, but the smell leaking from them felt dangerous even from a distance. The soil near one end of the pit had a strange grayish crust, like the surface of a burnt pot. Flies moved thickly over something in the center, the remains of a cow or a donkey, ribs clear, flesh stained an unnatural color. On the higher edge of the pit, near the shadow of a thorn tree, lay bones that did not match any livestock he knew. The skull was wide and short. The teeth, even without flesh, were unmistakable. The spine that trailed from it was gnawed, but still held the suggestion of powerful shoulders. Hyena. The animal at his side sat down heavily, as if the sight cost her something. Her front legs, where the fur had looked wrong from the road, showed bare patches now. The skin underneath had dark, cracked spots, as if something had burned it slowly over time. She lowered her head, sniffed once toward the pit, then away, then back again, unrest smoothing and roughening the lines of her shoulders. He stood in heat and quiet, and let the shape of the place settle into him. Someone had been using this hidden basin to dump industrial waste. Someone had thrown dead animals into the mix, animals that had eaten or drunk something they should not before they died. The smell of poison lay over everything like an invisible net. Hyenas and other scavengers would have come here. They always did. They followed their noses to the edges of human habits. A cheap carcass was a gift to them. They did not know about solvents and heavy metals and cheap pesticide powders. This female had survived whatever killed the others. He could picture the pattern now. She had fed here. She had watched companions collapse, watched others stumble away with burning bellies. She had learned to associate this place and the smells that hung around it with wrongness. Her legs had paid for that lesson. The reserve's boundary ran only a short walk away. The jeep's engine, the patrol's dust, the human who moved along that line every day were the nearest power she could reach. He did not know how much she understood. He did not need to. The fact remained, an animal that most visitors dismissed as a scavenger had led him straight to a wound in the land that his maps and his reports had missed. He took photographs, wide shots, close shots, careful frames of drums and bones, and the subtle change in soil color. He logged coordinates on his handheld unit. He noted tire tracks cutting in and out, deep enough to show regular use. When he had every detail he could gather, he backed away from the pit, not turning his back on it until thick thorn hid it again. The hyena rose and moved with him, stopping when he stopped, keeping a parallel distance like a quiet, rough-coated shadow. They reached the fence again. He squeezed under the lifted wire, turned to watch her. She did not cross. She stood on her side, tail low, watching him as he straightened the strands back into place. They were still damaged. It would take tools from the outpost to mend this properly. But that would come. He called in the dump that afternoon. His report was dry, a list of coordinates and descriptions, the way such things had to be on paper. In his mouth, it tasted like ash when he read it over the radio, because he knew what would follow. Meetings, investigations, slow arguments between departments about who was responsible for waste that sat just outside one kind of boundary and just inside another. Vehicles came. Officials walked where he had walked. They wore masks and gloves, squinted in the sun, pointed, nodded. Later, machines came to lift, scrape, load, and haul. For a while, the basin filled with noise as loud as any storm. Through it all, he kept driving his routes. For several days, he did not see the hyena. The quiet felt heavier than any dust. He checked the road more closely, searching for her tracks among others. He scanned the edges of his vision where thorn met sky. Nothing. Then, one evening, long after the worst of the waste had been taken away and the hollow stood scraped and raw, he took the same loop he had driven that first week. The sun sat low, turning the world the color of old brass. Heat bled away from the stones. Night birds tested their voices. At the bend where the track dropped toward the fence, he saw her. She stood on a low rise, front paws planted, head lifted. The scars on her forelegs were still there, but the skin around them looked less inflamed. Her coat, though still rough, carried a faint, healthy sheen where new fur had grown. She watched the jeep pass, ears forward, eyes steady. He slowed, not stopping, because stopping made wild things change their decisions. For a few heartbeats, they traveled side by side, machine on one line of dust, animal on another worn route through the grass. Then she peeled away, swinging back into the deeper bush, following a path that had nothing to do with him. The pit outside the reserve would never be completely clean. Poison sank deep. Crusts broke. But the worst of it was gone. Trucks had been fined. A company director had sat in an office one town over and heard an official say words like illegal and liability and criminal. None of those words would have meant anything to the hyena. What she had changed was simpler and larger at the same time. She had noticed something wrong long before any human report or satellite image. She had carried the knowledge in her scarred legs, in the way she avoided the smell and yet kept coming back to watch the place that killed her kin. And when a chance came to pull another species' attention toward it, she had taken it in the only way available to her. The ranger kept the note about her in his patrol book. Next to it, later, he added another line. Dump reported and removed. Female seen again near boundary. New fur growing. The pages filled up. Seasons turned. Rains came late one year and early the next. Calves were born. Lions moved dens. People at desks far away tried to redraw lines on maps that did not care about ink. Now and then, on certain days, if he took the northern road at dawn, he would see a familiar shape appear in the mirror, trotting in the soft light, keeping her own distance, her own time. She did not follow as closely anymore. She did not need to. The land had learned to speak through her once. It might never happen that way again. But he drove with his eyes sharper on the edges now, more willing to notice when a creature behaved in a way that did not fit the neat lines on his patrol charts. Big problems in wild places often announce themselves in small, strange patterns. A bird calling at the wrong hour, a pool drying faster than it should, a wild hyena choosing to match her steps to the growl of an old jeep for days on end. He would never know exactly what had moved in her mind in those first mornings when she dropped into his tire tracks and refused to leave them. He knew only what had happened when he finally stepped under the fence and followed. Sometimes that was enough.